you looking for a different level of truth about your challenges and struggles? Then be a part of the Yes and podcast, hosted by empowerment strategist and trauma specialist Jennifer Whitaker. Every Wednesday, we challenge conventional thinking on topics like trauma, healing, and so much more. Learn life lessons and great nuggets of wisdom from guests who've moved through their pain and suffering to discover a new purpose in life. Now, here's your host, Jennifer Whitaker.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Whitaker, and you are listening or watching another episode of Yes and. And if you want more information about me or about the Yes and podcast, please visit my website at jenniferwhitaker.com. That's Jennifer, Jennifer, Whitaker, WHITACRE.com. I like to spell it because it is an unusual spelling. And today's guest on Yes and is Moira Hutchison. Moira is a mindset cultivator, an energy healer, and a tarot consultant. She helps people who are struggling with their motivation and are feeling overwhelmed. Moira's process helps people recognize and remove their mindset blocks so they feel prosperous and they can serve their purpose in this world without suffering from burnout or self-sabotage. However, that's not why we're here today. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. Moira is here for an entirely different reason today because, as you know, I'm a trauma specialist, and Moira has overcome a significant amount of trauma in her life. And the reason we are here today is to talk about some of Moira's struggles and challenges in her early life that she has been able to overcome in order to get her here. And one of those challenges when she was 18 years old, she joined Scientology, which is a religious cult. And so Moira is going to talk to us today about her experiences in the Church of Scientology and what it was like to be in it and to get out of it and some of what she dealt with in the aftermath. So Moira, thank you so much for being here, and it's an honor to have you on the show, and I'm really humbled that you're willing to talk about this experience with me and to help my audience.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm very honored to be here too.
Yeah.
And so yes, it's funny to me now, to talk about this experience because I have had to do so much work, as you can imagine, in the work that you do, to overcome what it was I went through. And so if I share with you where I was to get in there, because what kept me in there, I was in there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what kept me there was it gave me what I was actually looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely. It often fills a need that it fills a hole that we don't have in our lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so what happened was all my life up until age sort of 16, 17, I wanted to be a nurse. That was everybody that knew me. I was a problem solver. I was a nurturer. I healed people. People gravitated towards me because I had a really good skill set in that area. Mm-hmm. And at the age of 17, I had applied to be a nurse at a prestigious nurse training college in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't do it. They wouldn't let me have the spot because I'd actually done some damage to my back. And at that point in Scotland, you could not, it's probably the truth now too still, if you have a weakened spine, they won't train you. If you have to lift a patient or take somebody's weight, that they don't want somebody who's got physical challenges, that's not going to really work out,
Okay.
And so here I am at age 17, kind of stuck. I'm stuck. That's why I help people get unstuck.
Mm-hmm.
But so stuck, but my family background was that I didn't have the kind of nurturing relationship where I could go and have a parent that would be a sounding board for me to sort of say, I have no idea. I was completely clueless about, well, that didn't work, so what am I going to do now? Mm-hmm. And so one of the suggestions by my dad was that I stayed home and be the mother to I'm the oldest of 5 girls. Mm-hmm. So he kind of invited me to step into this role, and I couldn't do that. I knew that would have swallowed me up. I kind of had already by that point.
Yeah. And was there a need for a mother in your family?
Yes. I was brought up by my father. My parents divorced when I was,
Okay.
my mother was in Canada and my father's in Scotland,
Okay.
and had sole custody of all 5 of us.
I see. And that resonates with me. I grew up without a mother. My mother passed away when I was young.
Okay.
So I didn't have 5 siblings. And at the same time, I understand the challenges of, not having a mother.
Yes.
Yes.
Not having a mother and then having a father who had his own stuff going on,
Mm-hmm.
and was never one that would sit and kind of counsel you or be a sounding board or make suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
His whole attitude was you'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
which is hard, especially, like I say, especially if it was like the ground had been taken away from under my feet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
And what you're saying, I'm just going to pause you for just a second for the sake of our listeners, because what you're saying really does follow what we know about cults, and not
yes,
just cults, but gangs, like street gangs, and what we're seeing
absolutely,
here in the United States with the recruitment into the neo-Nazi movement, because they
yes,
are recruiting,
mhm,
and even how predators groom children into sexual assault and human trafficking and, pedophilia, because there is already, before the child gets into the situation, what research is showing over and over and over again is there is already a disconnect in the relationship between the child and the parent that makes the child susceptible. So these groups come in and they offer all these promises and they groom the child to fill the hole that they're not getting in the parent-child relationship. So you're like, it's really illustrative of that. Parents are still telling their kids, figure it out,
yeah,
when we
yeah,
have the kids with the screen in front of their face all the time and no
I
parental
know,
guidance, they're figuring it out
exactly,
on their own in
hmm
really screwed up ways. So
yeah.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. And at the same
No,
time,
you
it's
just
a
put it really
beautiful
well.
lesson. It's a beautiful lesson. Yeah.
No, you just described it so perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of what you just said, though, too, is that these groups, these cults, these neo-Nazi gangs, what have you, the people who recruit are
Mm-hmm.
very clever.
They know. They
They know,
know.
yeah. They
Yes.
know what languaging. They also
Mm-hmm.
know. So here's the part of it too, is that, like you're saying, that when we don't get what we need from our
Mm-hmm.
parents,
Mm-hmm.
the other part is, just as spiritual beings, we all want to belong. We have
Mm-hmm.
this tribal mentality. We want to be part of a group that's like us, or
Yes.
that supports us, that sees us, that nurtures us, that
Mm-hmm.
helps us have a voice.
Right.
So if you're having somebody saying, oh, go figure it out by yourself, it's kind of like, well, what is that?
Yeah.
What is that? Who am I? Who am I outside of this?
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's funny because I'd actually been exposed to Scientology probably a year or so prior to me joining.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to, they recruit people by doing a free personality test.
Okay. I was going to
And
ask how they groomed you and how they got you into it. Yeah.
yeah, so they fed exactly what I was looking for,
Mm-hmm.
because so there's the part of it for me was, I remember that personality test, and it's actually a really good test. It's actually
Mm-hmm.
very, very all-encompassing. It really helps
Mm-hmm.
you see who you are on an emotional, spiritual, physical level,
Mm-hmm.
what your gifts and your attributes are, and
Mm-hmm.
where your strengths and weaknesses are.
Right.
So I decided to have another one. And of course, the very first thing that came up was this nurse part, this healer. It was like, wow, you have such a strong gift. You are so good at this.
Mm-hmm.
We can help you create the platform to bring your gifts fully, and you can save the world. We are going to help you use your gifts to save the world.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like,
Right.
that's exactly.
Right.
So here's the sounding board conversation that I really wanted,
Mm-hmm.
was because it did look at where my strengths and weaknesses are and how I could
Right.
overcome some of the weaknesses
Mm-hmm.
and get much more into being the healer that I wanted to be. And so it's like I just was able to keep all of that desire that I'd had as a teenager growing up, and then off you go.
Mm-hmm.
you need to come in. And it was kind of like coming in and being apprenticed.
Mm-hmm.
And because I remember back when I first started, I was doing lots of filing and paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
But there were some key characters in my initial. I lived in Edinburgh
Mm-hmm.
when this part of the story was in Edinburgh.
Okay.
And there was a couple of key nurturing, loving role models in there that kept saying, Moira, you are amazing. You are
Mm-hmm.
such a fast learner. You're exactly what we need in here. And like they really nurtured and played on that you're in the right place at the right time. You're following your passion. You're following your purpose. And so from there, I was chosen to go and train in East Grinstead, which is just outside of London.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of told alongside this, I'm just trying to remember the timeline, because part of the protocol is that you either, when you come into Scientology, you either bring your family in with you
Mm-hmm.
or you cut ties with them.
Yes,
And they really
I've heard
strongly,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, and that in and of itself is a red flag anywhere.
Yes.
If you were to cut ties, or you're not supposed to talk to your family, or don't tell somebody, or some harm will come to you, those types of threats, or that type of cutting off communication. Even in abusive domestic abuse relationships, there's often the abuser will manipulate in sneaky ways the more submissive partner into cutting ties with the family. And
Yeah.
I also want to say that I love that you mentioned that we all have this sense of belonging. You mentioned that a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true, because what we do when we don't have a sense of belonging in our own family, we adapt our behaviors so we can fit in. And
That's right.
fitting in is not the same thing as belonging. Fitting in comes from our dysfunctional, traumatized, trauma-driven behaviors, whereas belonging is, more of,
heart. It's heartfelt.
yeah,
Right?
it is.
It's
That
from the heart.
Right, from the heart, from the soul. And it's not the same thing as fitting in. Fitting in is, what do I have to do to fit in with these people? Whereas where can I just be me and belong to the world, and belong to, and we have to belong to ourselves first.
Absolutely.
and oftentimes, when we don't belong to our family, we don't learn how to belong to ourselves.
Yes.
So, and these, again, you're illustrating perfectly how these groups know what to say, they know what to do. And time and again, when predators have been interviewed, they know exactly what kids that they can target and what to say in order. And it sounds like they said all the right things. They gave you that nurturing, and it's one thing to see somebody's gifts, because I see your gifts as a healer and a nurturer, and that I see that in you.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like, to ask you to separate from your family, it's easy to miss those red flags when we don't have belonging with our family. It's easy to miss that red flag, because we finally feel this sense of belonging and sense of nurturing that we've never had. So it's not as big of a deal.
Absolutely.
That we're cut off where we didn't fit in anyway.
Exactly. And it's really funny, because so I did cut ties with my family.
Okay.
But it was interesting, because as I was being kind of guided to do that, so you were given three choices. You were either going to bring them in or cut ties, or if you had a problem cutting ties, they would help you.
Oh, wow.
So that was the backup plan. Is like, if you didn't have the capacity to go and say, I'm leaving, or I won't be staying here anymore. They didn't help me. But what happened was very interesting. My family, there was two instances that really kind of underlined that I don't belong here. The first one was one of my sisters. This is probably a couple months into being in Scientology, and I was still staying at home, but coming home very late because the hours were really long. And so one of my sisters put her hand up over her eyes and said, "Stop looking at me. It feels like you can see through into my soul."
Oh.
And so that didn't set very well for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other instance was my father told me to stop smiling all the time. What's wrong with you? You're happy all the time. Stop smiling. Nobody's that happy all the time. And so then to go back into Scientology and be further reminded, these aren't your people, you need to be in with us. It made it easier to say, I'm leaving. Yeah. And I did. And years after, in a conversation with my father, he said that when he saw me walking down the street after saying I'm gone, he thought he'd never see me again. Mm-hmm. Which of course he did, because I came out 2 years later. But I really, in that 2 years, nobody really knew where I was in my family.
Okay.
Because I did travel.
Yeah. Okay. And I know that, Scientology, being a cult, and some other people's experiences in Scientology had, like the celebrity Leah Remini has a little documentary, and then Jenna Miscavige, who was David Miscavige's niece, wrote a book called Beyond Belief: My Secret Life Inside Scientology and My Harrowing Escape. And because he was, he took over after L. Ron Hubbard died, right. her book was huge. And they both report, a lot of abuse, even physical abuse and fist fighting and things like that when, people step out of line or tried to escape or anything like that. And I'm just curious if you're willing to share some of your experiences in the 2 years that you were in. And did you experience any of that level of abuse while you were in there?
Not any fist fighting, but definitely I did. They have different, the ultimate one for the highest level of punishment is called the RPF. It's the Rehabilitation Project Force. And for that, it is like being in jail, where you don't get your meals with other people. You are not allowed to look anybody in the eye. You have to have eyes down. You have to run everywhere. You have to wear, the ones that I saw when I was in LA, they all wore clothing that looked like prisoners would wear.
And you said you have to run everywhere, like literally run?
Yeah, not fast run, but you had to be on a hurry.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
That one was more so in England that somebody had always said they had to run. And so you do menial tasks, you're talked to as if you are nothing, like a piece of crud. Wow. That you're just, and also, I've done a number of circuits through the rehabilitation processes. I never did get put onto the RPF. But I knew that's where I was going to be headed had they got me back when I actually finally did escape.
Okay.
Because that they it's kind of their protocol is that getting your ethics put right. Is there something wrong with you if you try to escape something that's so supportive and so much into saving the world, right?
And how long were you in before you started to get this sense that something was horribly wrong, something was off?
I would say it was after I came back from the States, because I actually did enjoy my time in the States.
Okay.
I was in Los Angeles for 7 months.
Okay.
For training, and that actually was a lot of fun. I made friends. The dynamic of it was different than what it was in England. In England, it was very, I don't know. I think I probably triggered a few people because when I came back, I was highly educated. In fact, that was part of my training. I always a bit of an overachiever. And so I actually was completely trained on how to run an entire organization. So then you can imagine I come back with this training and there's a few people that I would potentially be higher trained than. And so in order to kind of keep me in my place, they have this thing called, and I think Leah Remini talks about this, about the KRs, the knowledge reports. So it's if you see somebody doing something wrong or speaking badly or threatening to leave or having an affair or something like that, it's your duty to write it up, to put it in writing and give it to an ethics officer.
Yeah, Jenna mentioned that in her book too.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because that was a big thing. It's a big thing. And so what happens is you get this dossier being formed on you and it doesn't come out until the final straw. Like you do something that you get caught at. And then when you sit down and have this interview, they open up the file and it's like, well, on such and such a date you did this, and on such and such, and they read them to you.
And I also got the impression that if you are the person who turns in a knowledge report on somebody else, then it's like you get a little accolade of some sort.
Yes.
You know, like there's a reward to keep you, for lack of a better term, like tattletaling.
Being a spy.
Yeah, you know, it's like snitches get stitches, people. Come on.
Absolutely. And you know, it's really interesting because there was a mindset there. And this is, so you asked me about how long before I started to question. One of the things that really did make me start to question was when people did leave, and because I was witness to a number of people just leaving, you know, there's, even before I'd left to go to England, there was three young men that were all about the same age as me, and we all started about the same time, and one night they just disappeared. They decided that's it. They couldn't handle it anymore, and they ran. And so the thing about when people did that, the people who were left, there would always be this little sort of murmur, this rumor thing of, oh, I always knew there was something wrong with them. I always knew that person was a suppressive, right? We're called suppressives.
Yeah. And can you just explain for our audience what suppressive means? Because they might not know that term.
Yes. So there's two terms actually that gets talked about here. One is PTS, which means potential trouble source.
Okay.
And that can be somebody who's close to somebody who's suppressive. And a suppressive person is somebody who, to their way of saying things or thinking things, just is not in alignment with their teachings. Is bad. It's a label that says you are not for the highest good of healing or saving this world or in alignment with the doctrines of what they're doing. But it's done as a you are forbidden. If you are labeled a suppressive person, you are forbidden to actually talk to or interact with anybody who's still inside the church.
Okay.
And so this whole thing about when somebody would leave and be given this label, there would always be people that say, oh, I always knew that. I always knew there was something funny about that person, or that they were a potential trouble source. They were PTS. And so and I remember it happening. There was a pivotal one that happened. It was a husband and wife, and they were really amazing, nurturing, loving, older couple. And then they left. And then everybody's like, and I thought, well, I didn't see it. I didn't feel it. I saw them as being very, very healing, very nurturing, very loving. And so it became harder and harder for me to agree with the opinion of other people around me. And so that went on for a fair period of time because I had nobody to speak to. Isn't that funny? That's actually just like how it was in my own family, is like, here I am having this opinion or having this need and having nowhere to express that or explore it or have a sounding board.
Yeah. And it's also really, again, illustrative of how these patterns repeat in our lives in different ways. If we become aware of them and you start to see them, it doesn't always play out in the exact same way when these patterns show up in our lives.
That's right.
So thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. And it's also illustrative of how labels can be harmful, you know, because a suppressive person sounds like almost this, like this pseudo excommunication, which
that's what it is.
You give somebody this,
what it is.
Yeah. So you give somebody this label and it gives everybody free reign to, kind of, pick on them and abuse them. It's just like, there are other situations in life where, people get certain labels, like geek or nerd, which, just opens you up to be picked on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. But it is it. And I like what you just said about the excommunication, because that is what it is. When you are labeled suppressive, you are excommunicated. And that's because that's the other part for me. When I came out, it probably took 2 years to actually integrate back into real life. Because the other part of it in Scientology is they have a language of their own. So they use words that we use, but they have different definitions. In fact, the dictionary is about this thick, couple of inches thick for people who couldn't see me do that on camera. And that was part of the training. It was that you had to understand their philosophies and their way of defining certain words. And so when you came out, it was really difficult to have a proper conversation. But also you have this what's the word? It's kind of a dismissive, derogatory somewhat viewpoint of the rest of the world. In Scientology, everybody else who's outside are called wogs.
Okay.
They're the unenlightened, you see.
Kind of like the Muggles, only different.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly that. And so you can imagine coming into that after having been immersed fully for 2 years into the bubble that Scientology creates. And then you're out, and you can't go backwards now. You can't rely on any friendships that you had in there. And now you have to try and support yourself and get a job. And
so Moira, how
difficult.
did you get out? Because you even used earlier in the conversation, you even said, when I escaped. So getting out and escaping are two they bring up two very different scenarios in my mind. So can you tell us a little bit about how you actually got out of Scientology and what that experience was like?
Absolutely. And it excuse me, there was two. I had to leave twice, basically, because what happened was, so remember I said to you I had nobody to speak to. I was sent on a mission from East Grinstead, which is outside of London, to Plymouth. And that's where I met someone who, he wasn't a full staff member. He actually kind of part-time. He was a part-time person. And so he had a life outside. And so he was easier to talk to because he didn't have as high a level of the indoctrination as I carried, basically. So he became my ally and somebody that I could speak to about these thoughts, like I just shared some of them with you. So he helped me escape from there. And it's really funny. Here's me being the super responsible person. I knew I had to leave because I was in trouble. And I sat and wrote up all the different cases I was working on and who was doing what and who was at what stage in their treatment or their course. And I wrote it all out. And so he was waiting for me at the fire escape door because I had to run because there were some officers, 3 officers had come to take me back and I would actually, they would have been taking me back to the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force.
Oh, wow. So that's the prison like scenario.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you were that close.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. My goodness.
And so instead of just running at that point, I went upstairs to my office. And like I said, I sat and wrote like 3 or 4 pages of all this just because I just felt very compassionate about all the people that I was actually helping. Once I was finished, I ran down the fire escape and into this guy's car, and we took off. We went and I think we stayed out of his house until 2 a.m. because we knew that they would know it was him that had helped me, and they would come knocking at his door, which they did. The neighbors said that they actually had knocked at the door and sat on the doorstep for like hours.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So
and I heard similar stories on Leah Remini's show and in Jenna's book, where it's almost like they have a leg up on what we consider in civilian world, like private investigators. It's like they're highly trained at tracking people.
Oh, yes, they are. Absolutely. So that was the first part, but I wasn't free at that point. So basically what happened was I don't know what time it was in the morning. Somebody just walked into his house and walked into the bedroom, threw my clothes at me and said, "Get up. I'm not letting you do this." And basically escorted me out of this house and into her car And she lived outside of Plymouth, so she took me out to her house and was saying, I need to save you from yourself. If somebody was doing this, you would do the same thing, which I don't think I would have, but she was on the phone getting instructions and directions on what to do next. And basically she took me to a bus station where I was met by somebody else. And everybody, when I was being met, they were crossing my arms, like holding my arms and escorting me forcibly and just saying, don't make a scene, get on, do this. And so I was escorted onto the bus, so the bus went from Plymouth to London. And then in London, and so it was really funny because in my head, I'm thinking, well, I have to get away. I was determined that I was going to run away, but not cause a scene. And so I thought, well, London station was pretty big. And I just thought, well, I'm going to run. And so, of course, when the bus got into London, there was 2 more people there who I recognized. Like I knew who they were. And they were like, hi, Moira, we're here to make sure you get on that train. So they get me on the train, and there's a little piece that I need to interject here. The person who was escorting me in Plymouth handed me a bag of change, and she said, I'd emptied this change bowl off your desk, and gave that to me. Just needed to tell you that because there's a point to that. So she gets me on the train. So now I only have one person escorting me, but she was sitting with her legs stuck so that I couldn't get out of the train. It was like two seats. And so I thought, well, now I'm on, there's one last stop and I need to get out. And so I started talking to her. I have no idea what I said. I just was basically, now I knew I'm being sentenced to the RPF. There is nobody's going to let me talk or tell them what had gone on or why I was doing what I was doing. And so finally,
I want to say something here really quick before you go on, because I love that you just said what you said. Whenever it comes to like the fight or flight response, the survival response, there is another one. It's not just rest and digest and fight or flight in our nervous system. There's this tend and befriend, and it's almost a negotiation for our life. And that is something that's held against people in the court system. You know, like, why did you say what you said? Why did you, tell the guy who raped you that you loved you? Why did you say all these things to him? Why did you say, oh yes, I love you so much and I'll do whatever you want? It's a negotiation for your own life.
Yeah,
and if you don't remember
at stake.
Exactly. And so I love that you point that out, because your body was going into this, okay, fight or flight might not work. Okay, the freeze response isn't going to help me here. I certainly can't rest and digest. So let's try to tend and befriend and negotiate for my own survival. So sorry.
That's beautifully.
So
Thank you for
please
filling
go on.
that in.
So please go on, because that is a normal, again, it doesn't happen to everybody, but whenever we are in survival, that's something that humans can do. And it's below our conscious awareness, which I love that you said, I don't remember what I said, because if it were in your conscious awareness and you planned it and you knew what you were doing, you would remember what you said. This was part of your physiology, for your own survival. So again, as a trauma specialist, I like to point these things out to help people understand from real life scenarios. So,
and I love that you said it. Whatever I said could never have been held against me, or if they tried to. So not knowing, but something in there made her, she didn't say anything. She just put her feet down. And as she put her feet down, the train was at East Croydon train station, and it was the doors were about to shut and leave. And I just literally vaulted out of the seat and onto the platform, and it took off. So that's what I say. I jumped off a train to get away.
Wow.
And so and as soon as I did that, there was this sense of serenity. I will always remember that part of my feet hitting the platform and kind of doing a reset and feeling like I things went into kind of slow motion, because now I've done this. I'm in a train station I've never been in before. I had that bag of change in my hand, and that was it.
Yeah.
And so, and the other thing, I had the ticket stub in my hand too. to give to the conductor. So then I crossed over the platform because I wanted to go back into London.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was funny too, because I get on the train, because it's not very far. East Croydon to London is not very far. And so as I got into London, now I still got this train stop, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to say to that conductor? Because this says East Grinstead on it.
Mm-hmm.
So how is he going to let me off? Because that's not what my ticket is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to figure out something to say. And he looked at me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, it's okay. I knew you were in trouble and I'm glad you're safe.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that is.
People have
That
often said that was one of my angels. There's a couple of angels during this
That's what I'm thinking, is like angels show up in, the most unexpected points in time in our life, and they're not always these ethereal beings with wings like we imagine. They're real people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're real people. And so from there, because now at this point, I want to go back to Plymouth, because the only person I know outside of Scientology at this moment is this guy that had actually helped me run. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and that's where my stuff was. It's very few belongings, but that's where it was his house. Mm-hmm. So turned out I had enough money in that change bag to buy a train ticket from London to Plymouth. Mm-hmm. But again, it's so funny because I don't know my way around. I just know where the organization is. I know where Scientology is. That's it. I don't know my way around any city. And so it was really funny because on the train, and this train I was sitting with the table in between. I don't know if people over here know about these British trains where there's two seats facing and then a table in the middle. And so I was in an empty carriage, and this off-duty soldier came and said, "Can I sit with you?" I kind of thought it was weird, but sure. And it was just because he didn't want to journey on his own, and he had a six-pack of beer and gave me a beer, and we just talked. I don't know what we talked about. But then when we got to the train station in Plymouth, he asked me, where was I going? And I knew the address, but I had no idea how to get there. And he said, "Oh, no problem. That's close to where I'm going." So he walked me back to where I needed to go.
Oh, another angel.
Another angel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then very quickly after that, in the mail, I got a declaration of being a suppressive person. So that was it. Like, they never did try to get me back. There was somebody tried years later in Edinburgh when I was there. Somebody that knew me tried to, but that was by that point. Because it's really funny. I tell that story about how I was strong-armed and escorted. It's like there is no way anybody could do that to me now. But it's and Jennifer, you must know this, that it's almost like a baby fawn learning to walk. Yeah. That coming out of something like that is that I didn't even trust my own self for walking or looking at somebody or asking or speaking who I was or what I needed or what I wanted.
Right. So because I was about to ask about, what your experience was after you got out, because, like we all have the movie in our heads where you got out of the train, somebody walked you back to where your things were, and then the credits start rolling, the movie's over. And that's not necessarily the happily ever after. Like, what was the spillover effect that you had to, because I would imagine there was a lot to overcome.
Oh, there was.
Once you got out.
There was a lot to overcome. I really had no skill set, so I had to kind of make up different experiences, because I wasn't about to say, "Oh, I have this 2-year gap on my resume. It's because I was in a cult." And so I worked as a temp, doing clerical work and bookkeeping, and worked my way up. So I was 20 going on 21 when this happened. And by the age of 24, I actually was an office manager. So that gives you an idea of how fast, how driven, and how much I pushed, of just learning on the go and learning on the go. But something I want to share with your listeners and with you is there is a huge trauma that happened probably 3 months after I came out. So I came out, and this was in sort of July, August time. And I got really, really sick end of September, October, like unbelievably sick. By that point, all I was doing was cleaning work because I didn't have any temp job. So I was being a cleaner, industrial cleaner. And I started getting really, really sick. So sick that one morning I couldn't get out of bed. And so I had to wait until my friend came back home from lunchtime to help me get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
And he called a doctor, and basically I was rushed to hospital in an ambulance because they didn't quite know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
But so it devolved. I became bedridden. I had to have a catheter fitted. I had drips and basically what had happened was I had peritonitis.
Oh, wow.
But in the run up to the diagnosis, and it was like I was bedridden and having all these.
And can you tell our
things.
Listeners what peritonitis is?
Sure, it's an abscess of the peritoneal sac, and that's the sac that holds all of your inner organs, your intestines, your. So just to give you, and I know we need to watch time, but I had a miscarriage when I was in Scientology.
Oh, okay.
And once I had the miscarriage, didn't go for any further treatment because there was a doctor that just said, "Oh, there's no baby there. Off you go." And of course, being in Scientology, they don't give you time off or sick leave or anything like that. So it just continued. So,
well, and even getting pregnant in Scientology could have made you a suppressive person, as I understand. Is that correct?
It can, because I was married, and so when you're married, that's okay, but they would take your child. They would take your child.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Because it would be okay. So these people, they because they're schooling them to be the future of Scientology. I don't know what would have happened had I had the baby and continued like that. But at the beginning, it was just like, well, you're married and things like that happen, right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
But so in that, you can imagine that here's me still in this mindset of fear-based mindset a lot. And I remember thinking, this is it, I'm going to die. And they were right. Because that's the whole part of it, is that they say you will not survive if you leave. That basically, and some people will talk about that if that's why they stay in there, is because they're too scared of what would happen if they left. And so that was my fear, was that I've screwed up. I've created this for myself because I left behind what I should have stayed in. Yeah.
And again, it's illustrative of that core belief system, and how that core belief system deep down, even though it's below the radar of your conscious mind, how that core belief system really just bleeds into every aspect of our life. And it can vary for a lot of people, and very often it will get you down to the point that you're horribly sick, almost deathly so sometimes.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And peritonitis is not something to snuff at. That can lead to sepsis, like systemic sepsis.
Absolutely.
And again, just to kind of help the listeners understand a little bit more about the peritoneum, that's the reason that you're, like, as you're running or you're walking around, that your organs don't get all mixed up, like vegetables in a bowl or something. That's why your stomach stays where your stomach stays, and why your liver stays where your liver stays. It is anchored by the peritoneum. It's part of the fascial system. So and inflammation in that, or an abscess in that, is life-threatening. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was. And then unfortunately, because at this point I was 21, and they put off having surgery. They didn't want to do surgery if they didn't have to. But then when they realized what was going on, I had to be rushed into, I think it was an 11-hour surgery to save my life. When they realized it's peritonitis, and it's actually really bad. They told me afterwards that my they took out my appendix, and it was actually completely rotted from the outside in, which told them how long it had been getting worse and worse, basically.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, so I'm still here. So obviously it was the part of my journey, and from there, so it took me probably a year to get over that. And So, this is why I do the work that I do, is that fear, like even telling you about that fear, I remember that fear so vividly.
Right.
Of so, we were talking about that pattern of making a decision, wanting to belong, wanting to find your people, and then being alone and not having it. And so it kept happening. And so that was the third one, was now I'm alone. I think, if in all honesty, that actually made me really, really connect with my own divinity, with my own higher self, and really help, get access to that. I've always been an intuitive, but that one was the one that kind of made me listen to my own guardian angels more.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like just throughout your whole story that your own guardian angels or your own internal guidance system was speaking to you all along, with just, just even something as little as, this married couple that left Scientology, and you're like, well, I didn't have that experience. That's not how I saw them. There's something inside of you going, no, these were good people. Why are you labeling them? And, and learning to trust that. And, and whenever we were talking about this before, we started recording or anything, you mentioned to me that you are now grateful for this experience. And that speaks volumes to me about the healing that you've gone through. So can you talk a little bit about what you mean by saying that you're grateful for your experience? Because I guarantee that some of our listeners are going, what the F does she mean? Why would she be grateful for that shit that she went through? So can you help people understand, how you came to that level of gratitude and what that means to you?
Absolutely. I think that part of it, and to your point about the inner guidance, is like really seeing that. I think that this experience helped me galvanize that connection of I need to. It's not just a passing thing. It's that has to be the go-to, not the check with somebody else first and then see what your guidance says. It's like, no, it's got to be first and foremost. Yes. And if you have a yucky feeling about something, chances are it's right.
Exactly. Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo. Yes. Even about your own family sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so then and that's why I'm saying is I'm grateful, because all of the things that I help people do, I have my own process. I call it the letting go process. It's 5 steps to help people, get to a sense of where are they, and start reconnecting with that inner voice, and really then walking forward and releasing. And sometimes we need to still be in the presence of people who are not as supportive or who don't get who you are. But there's certain things you can do to kind of claim your own space, your own energy space, and not allow it to be sort of drained out of you or sapped by trying to be something that you're not. I think, so that's a really big piece for me. And I think as I've grown older too, is that I come to the realization is I'm here to be me. I'm not here to take on a different persona in order to gain approval or gain acceptance, because it's not true acceptance if it's based upon something that I'm doing for somebody.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're trying to, again, it's that fitting in versus belonging. Yes. Because the belonging comes from within, and it's such an important life lesson. And I like what you were just saying, about being around people who are not necessarily supportive, because if we have that connection inside of ourselves, and I don't believe that we're ever going to get to a point in life where there isn't somebody that we encounter, because we have no control over whether somebody accepts us or likes us, or is going to try to hurt us. We don't have control over that in any way, shape, or form. The only thing we have control over is what we experience inside ourselves and what we choose to do about that. Exactly. And if we have that connection to our inner guidance, it doesn't matter what other people say about us. It doesn't matter what other people think about us. It doesn't matter if they support us. We support ourselves.
Absolutely.
So we can endure whatever comes our way. Yeah.
Exactly. And that creates the sense of resilience.
Absolutely.
Because it's funny that I love what you just said. I've actually come to the realization, and I say it all the time, is other people's opinion of us is none of our business.
Right.
So it's like our opinion of ourselves is the utmost importance.
Yes. And when we start to make other people's opinions of ourselves our business, then that right there is a huge red flag that we have an external locus of control and we're not connected with our own inner guidance system.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so Moira, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
My pleasure.
And I sorry, I'm ruffling through papers here at the moment. So I do want to let our listeners know, I'm going to put up links on how our listeners can find you at thewellnessuniverse.com. You can look for Moira Hutchison and she'll come up. That's one way to connect with her. We're also going to put a link up on Facebook on how you can connect with Moira. So you can just go to the show notes and click those links. And, again, when it comes to working with practitioners, it's one thing to learn about healing and then to go out and do it, or to go through a program where you learn how to be a coach or learn how to be a mentor. It's another thing to have life experience that backs it up. And
Absolutely.
Moira, I do have to say, for you have the life experience to back up the healing that you are sharing with other people. So again, for my listeners, Moira's the real deal. She's not just regurgitating some level of bullshit that she learned from a textbook or some other guru. She's been through it. And so she sees things that the average person doesn't see when it comes to healing. Moira has a library of guided meditations. Again, I will put that up. It's Insight, INSIG, Insight /
Insight Timer.
What was it?
So that's the link. It's Insight Timer.
Insight Timer.
Okay. That link that you're talking about is the one directly to my library, but the app is called Insight Timer. Insight Timer.
Okay. So am I getting this right? Is it INSIG.HT or is it
That's
Insight?
Correct.
Okay, .HT / Wellness Moira. She's also got letting go guidance cards. Again, at wellnesswithmoira.com. You can find that under products. And she is an author. She's written a couple books and she's also contributed to a couple other books. You can find her on the Amazon author page by looking up Moira Hutchison. And again, we're going to put a link up for that as well. And I know that you are a mindset cultivator, an energy healer, and a tarot consultant. So Moira, can you tell people how to reach out to you if they want to work with you directly in your mindset cultivation, program or anything like that?
Absolutely. The easiest way is to connect with me on my website. There's a couple of avenues to connect with me. And my email address is Moira, MOIRA, @wellnesswithmoira.com.
Okay, fantastic.
I know you have that link there too. So.
I do have that link, so we can put that up in the show notes as well.
So connecting through my website or on Facebook is the usual way that people connect with me.
Okay. Yeah. And so Moira, thank you so much, because there are so many children right now who are susceptible, and not necessarily, I don't think everybody's going to be susceptible to getting to finding themselves in an organized cult like Scientology. However, what you have pointed out today is the same type of susceptibility and the same type of disconnect that allows kids to be susceptible to online predators.
For sure.
I live in Ohio here in the United States, and just the level of kids who are sucked into human trafficking and addiction. Like, we are almost ground zero here, like in that Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania area for the opioid crisis in the United States. A lot of overdoses, and again, all of these things, like the people who are grooming our kids into human trafficking are doing what you said. They're filling a gap. They're saying the right things. And even when little kids, 11, 12, 13, 14, I guess they're not little, but, tweeners and teens, even when they get the red flags, they overlook the red flags because they don't have that connection with their parents. There's something in that nurturing relationship between the child and the parent that's not there. And I think what happens is a lot of kids know that if they go say something and they're like, oh my God, this weird, creepy guy reached out to me on Instagram and I don't know what to do. He sent me a dick pic, Dad. What do I do? The kid's going to get yelled at because it's so common in this country for the parents to yell at the kids and say, well, what were you doing on Instagram? And then shaming the kids.
Yeah. So just the next time they're not going to tell you.
Exactly, for wanting to be part of the group. And when we shame our children for wanting to be part of the group and doing what all their friends are doing, they're exactly what you said. They're never going to turn to their parent, and they're not going to trust the parent to reach out whenever they get that creepy feeling. So again, I hope this raises a little bit of awareness about parenting and how we can start to heal some of those rifts that exist in that parent-child relationship. And I really think this is so illustrative. You know, and a lot of times in the grooming, sometimes there is months if somebody actually gets into a cult. There could be months that go by before you start to realize any major red flags or before the red flags start to sink in, because we talk ourselves out of them and we overlook them. Yeah,
we just say, oh, I'm making things up.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining that.
Right. So thank you so much for sharing your story and raising this level of awareness, because I know that this is going to help people. And Moira, before we sign off today, do you have any final tips or bits of wisdom to leave with our listeners?
Just to always trust that inner voice. Trust what you've got going in, and do things to actually, like, pause before you say yes to somebody's offer or somebody asking you to do something.
Beautiful.
It's always there. It is always there.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much, Moira. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
And for all of our listeners, again, please visit jenniferwhitaker.com. You can go to jenniferwhitaker.com/podcast, and that's where you can watch the video. This will also be put up on Facebook. You can watch the video on Facebook on Jennifer Whitaker's page, which is at YesAndJW. You can find it on jenniferwhitaker.com. And please subscribe. There are several back episodes on there with equally valuable information. So listen, subscribe, and share this, because this information that Moira has shared with us today has the potential to raise awareness that can save lives. So Moira, thank you again for being here. And for all of our listeners, I will see you all next week on Yes And.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
We have just concluded another episode of the Yes And podcast with Jennifer Whitaker. For additional resources, please visit our website, jenniferwhitaker.com. Leave a review if you enjoyed the show and find it useful. Until next time, continue challenging conventional thinking and keep moving forward.